the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Hi, Justin.
Hey, Lindsay.
We've got this new mic setup. We're like directly facing each other.
I know it's been a while. Like we reconfigured the room, and now I can look you in the eye this time.
It's a stare off now.
Yeah.
But I'm the one that's watching the TV.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah,
so.
I don't get to see the TV behind me.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We should do a James Cameron technique and put a mirror behind me.
We could do that.
You could watch it behind me.
We could do that. We'll complicate things later.
Perfect. Speaking of James Cameron, this is our third Cameron film that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, we did Terminator and we did The Abyss and now Aliens. And we did do Alien.
It's true.
So we're trying not to be redundant here. If you've heard those episodes, there might be a little bit of crossover, but we're going to try. I've referenced the old episodes a little bit to make sure we don't repeat ourselves too much.
Yeah, there's enough about aliens that we don't even need to retread any of that.
I'm pretty excited. You know, we sprinkle in these big, huge hits from the 80s, and this is probably one of the biggest ones, at least for me, one of my most loved movies of the 80s. And we talk about this a lot recently of like movies that have stood the test of time and they feel modern even though they're, you know, going on 30-something years old. And man, Aliens to me is like, it is very slick. This is one of those movies where I wish I could have been someone who was like of age to see this in the theater. I was a kid when this came out, but I just imagine that this movie would, you know, I've read some comments of people that said that, you know, they did see this in its original release and said, you know, they were just completely floored, like kind of frazzled coming out of the theater because this movie is so intense. And it really is. This is one of the more intense movies that I think I've seen. And it does a good job of carrying over the story of the original Alien, but it's its own movie. And I think a lot of that, almost all of it, is because of Cameron.
And Cameron loved the original 1979 Ridley Scott Alien movie. It is a feat by itself. Everything about that film is a standalone story and vibe and tone. Everything is its own thing, especially when you compare it to the sequel. And I think that that's one of the things that makes the sequel so wonderful and is a continuation of the main character, Ripley. It is a completely different like vibe, everything about it. Like the first Alien is about, you know, kind of like being alone and isolated, and it's very haunting and creepy. Like I think of the first Alien movie as a horror film. It's a horror science fiction. This one is not set up the same way, and it's rare in a franchise where you can say that the sequel is as good or at least on the same footing as what came before it. And Aliens, definitely up there.
And we'll get into a lot of this in a little bit here, but just in terms of sequels, I mean, this has always been talked about as being one of the best sequels of all time, and I agree with that 100%. But I also think this was at a time where they weren't making sequels out of just everything. Mm-hmm. You know, now if a movie has a good opening weekend, there's a story. Usually an article comes out like 3 weeks later. It says, oh, they're already thinking about, you know, the sequel. And it's like a sequel is made to anything now, even if it's wanted or not. You know, Alien was a big movie. It was a movie that a lot of people loved. It was kind of groundbreaking, and there had been some time had surpassed since it came out. You know, there was about 6 years. They didn't just crank Aliens out right away, so there was a lot of thought and time put into it, and we'll get into a lot of that here. We'll get into Cameron coming on board, writing this script. We've talked about this before in our Cameron episodes where you don't really think of James Cameron as much of a scriptwriter, but he really did, you know, write all of his movies pretty much. And, you know, you can look at this movie and think it's a big shoot 'em up action movie, but there's a lot of depth to the characters, and he adds a lot of, I think, real life situations, and then, adds a lot of like the bureaucratic stuff of the government and how things happen, and makes it very clear and very quick moving. And so we're not caught up in like sort of a unclear story that we don't know what's going on, and you have to watch it like 50 times to figure out what's happening.
Another thing with Cameron that it's easy to forget is that the guy is an artist, and there's a reason, he starts out with something like Terminator and then moves on to Aliens. Both of these films are high visual concepts, and they're pretty much, he gave a lot of direction to everyone that's involved in special effects and just the story and overall idea. And to visualize two epic movies like this, it's kind of like you're functioning on a different level. And I think not every writer director can do that. And I don't think that's not how it should be. It's not how everybody is. It's just, I think one aspect that makes James Cameron, I never thought I would be like someone that's like, James Cameron's awesome, but he functions on a different level, and is a quirky, some would say difficult to get along with person. But I think when you are kind of like someone on the fringes a little bit, it makes sense that you're maybe can be a little difficult sometimes.
Yeah, with every episode that we've done on Cameron, my appreciation level of him grows, exponentially. And he really has become one of my favorite filmmakers. And I was the same way. It's like James Cameron,
I think because he comes off like really lofty sometimes.
Yeah,
and you're like,
yeah. And,
come on, man.
But, and I think too, because his last two films are sort of these big, Titanic and Avatar, but like he had such an amazing run here with the 80s and the 90s. And we're going to get into a lot of aliens talk, the making of, production stories. We'll get into a little bit about the special effects, and our favorite thing to talk about is the cast. And this is another one of our favorites here, an ensemble piece led by really strong performances.
We're also trying to, or at least I am secretly, not a secret anymore, I'm hoping that throughout this entire run of the podcast that we're going to talk about every Sigourney Weaver movie ever made. That's really what I'm gunning for.
That's when you tap out. You like officially, hand me a resignation once we've run out of Sigourney Weaver movies.
Well, we done Heartbreakers. I'm out. Of course, yes, we're going to talk about the cast. We'll talk about the music and release reception like we always do. I'd like to get into talking just a little bit, maybe when we wrap everything up, on maybe our thoughts on Alien 3 and Resurrection. And there's a lot of difficulties during the production and even into post-production. So stick with us through this episode because it's a real saga.
So plenty of aliens talk. Then we'll get into our picks of the week. I, as always, had a difficult time just...
You changed your mind a few times again.
I always do. I don't know what's... I'm like someone that's like flipping channels like constantly, and I just spend about 3 hours never landing on the movie, and I'm just like up half the night just like trying to decide on something.
Yeah, one night you sent me like 4 different options.
Yeah.
I'm like, just pick one, man. I don't care.
I did, yeah. Sometimes I need you to just freaking pick a movie. And I did. I landed on... which is like the last movie I thought that I'd use for my pick of the week, but Rambo First Blood Part 2, co-written by Cameron, who wrote it, when he was in the middle of writing Terminator and Aliens. And I hadn't seen it since I was probably 12 or 13. And man, I can't wait to talk about it. I was really, really surprised at my reaction to that movie.
Ooh, I'm anxious to hear about this. I saw all of the Rambo movies when I was a kid, but it's probably been since I was younger than 12, I think, since I've seen any of them. Now
is the time to get back into Rambo. I'm telling you.
I think I have to.
Yeah.
Another thing is Rambo always looked like my brother to me, so it was a different experience for me.
And your brother was like cut and got his body fat down to 2%.
I don't know if he'd say that today, but certainly when he was 16, yes.
Yeah. And what was your pick of the week?
I went with a deep cut. I think it's a deep cut anyway for Sigourney Weaver, a movie that I found when I worked at a video rental, and I'm like, I've never seen this. What the heck's this about? It's called Death and the Maiden. If you like Sigourney Weaver's intensity, this movie is nothing but that.
You've been on a real tear here doing picks of the week of movies that I've never seen.
Well, there was that, and her other one, Year of Living Dangerously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not as hip to Sigourney Weaver's earlier works as you are.
I grew up with her, man.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I'm gonna catch up. This I looked up Death and the Maiden. It looks really interesting. I think it was probably like too adult oriented when it came out for me.
so adult oriented.
Yeah, but I look forward to hearing about that. We'll round things out with our Murray moment. But before we get into our first clip of Aliens, Lindsay, can you give us your interpretation of what the hell this movie is about?
So you guys ever heard of what an alien is? It's like a thing from another planet. It's kind of like that.
The first movie is about one alien. This one's about a handful of them.
Just a handful, you can fit them in your hand. Well, in this sequel to the highly revered science fiction horror classic Alien, we rejoin Lieutenant Ellen Ripley, who, after she narrowly escaped her last run-in with a vicious alien entity, then she blasts herself off into space, into hypersleep. She'd hoped that she'd be found by anyone other than the beast that she just battled. And she's found all right, even by a company ship for whom she worked. Except it's 57 years later. I mean, that's a rough one for anybody. Times have changed, and no one at the company believes the horrors that she lived through. That is, until contact is lost with the now colonized planet from which Ripley had previously escaped. She's the only one who lived to tell what happened, and now, flanked by a motley crew of Marines and a giant arsenal of firepower, Ripley's convinced to help explore what happened to this now incommunicado colony. She's battled one of these massively terrifying alien creatures before, but the reason this movie is called Aliens and not Alien 2, well, there's a reason for that.
I'm looking forward to finding out the reason behind that.
Did I not spell it out pretty clearly?
Thank you for that.
Of course.
Well, let's go to our first clip. We'll come back. We'll talk about some aliens.
I say we grease this rat fuck son of a bitch right now.
Just doesn't make any goddamn sense.
He figured that he could get an alien back through quarantine if one of us was impregnated, whatever you call it, and then frozen for the trip home. Nobody would know about the embryos we were carrying. Me and Newt.
Wait a minute now, we'd all know.
Yes, the only way he could do it is if he sabotaged certain freezers on the way home. Namely yours. Then he could jettison the bodies and make up any story he liked.
Fuck! He's dead. You're dog meat, pal.
This is so nuts. I mean, listen to what you're saying. It's paranoid delusion. It's really sad. It's pathetic.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them fucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
All right, we waste him. No offense.
No! Gotta go back. They cut the power.
What do you mean they cut the power? How could they cut the power, man? They're animals.
I want you two with trackers checking the corridors. Move!
Gorman, watch Burke.
I got him.
Newt, stay close.
I'll go this side.
You do that, man.
So like I was saying at the top of the episode, sequels are these days, it's just like they crank them out, you know, like we're up to, me and you recently saw Scream 5, you know, It was like the latest sequel that we saw. And movies that just don't even seem like they need 3 and 4 and 5. But Alien was a huge success and there was an interest in doing a sequel to that. But there was a lot of red tape, a lot of legal battles over profits at 20th Century Fox that really stretched out. And by the time all that got cleared up, it was 1983. And that's a big length of time in Hollywood years. By 83, interest was sort of dwindling, but it still seemed like a very profitable move to make a sequel to Alien. Original producer of Alien, David Giler, was approached on the 20th Century Fox lot in 83, was asked, you know, if he had an idea for a sequel to Aliens. And he got together with Walter Hill, who also produced Alien, and they had an idea of a quick pitch that was Southern Comfort, which was a movie that Walter Hill had just directed, meets The Magnificent Seven. And I love Southern Comfort.
Yeah, so do I.
That's a pretty good pitch there.
Yeah.
Pretty good combination. that got the studio a little bit excited. And at this point in time, from the research that we found, I didn't really hear too much about Ridley Scott coming up in the conversation of getting him to direct a sequel to Aliens, but it's there that James Cameron enters the conversation about looking for somebody new to take over the reins of this sequel to Alien.
But that's not to say he was initially thought of as the director at all. He was approached by David Giler, who had just gotten a hold of the Terminator script, and this is before Terminator went into production, very soon before it went into production, but he saw the script, thought it was incredible, and got one of his development executives to contact Cameron, see if Cameron had any interest or wanted to talk to him about maybe writing the script for Aliens. So Cameron is totally stoked at the idea of writing a possible sequel to Alien. He meets with Giler and wrote pretty much of a half draft kind of treatment, 40, 50 pages in just 3 days, and turned that in around late 83. Why it was kind of easy for Cameron to crank out the story was that he had a pre-existing idea. He had this story called Mother already in his arsenal, and it's not an exact replica of Aliens, but it did have to do with an alien space station kind of thing, and even included the power loader that we see in one of the climactic scenes eventually in Aliens. But most importantly, the one thematic element that was included in this story called Mother was that it was involving two mothers who were defending their children. And wow, like what a strong, intense story like that would be. I don't know too much about it, but just, taking these little nuggets and putting it into the continuation of the story of Alien, this was always something that was like a running theme throughout this movie. And so to make that such a big part in the sequel made total sense. You drop in Ripley, throw in some Marines. Let's take this a step beyond horror and make it more into an action film. And you've got what sounds like could be a really explosive sequel. So Cameron turns in this treatment to David Giler and Walter Hill. They love the idea and think that this is the direction that they want to move forward with. So they authorize Cameron to go ahead with the script. Now, the same day, this is wild, the same day, Cameron's told that he has the opportunity to write First Blood Part 2 and also needs to get moving on Terminator. He's got to do some rewrites on that and thinks, okay, Aliens is a huge opportunity for me. I can't blow this, but I want to do First Blood Part 2. I have to do Terminator. What am I going to do? And Giler and Hill are like, okay, you have to do what you have to do. Aliens has already been on hold for a long while. We're still in the preliminary development process. Do what you need to do. So in 3 months, Cameron really just shows what a true brilliant psycho he is and does the math on all three of these movies and figures, okay, they're all going to be 2 hours. Going to be 120 pages each on these scripts, figures out how many pages he needs to write per day, per hour. And when you got a brain like this, I mean, you got to admire that. I strive to have that sort of brain and I admire it. But man, to have the dedication and confidence in yourself to go, I'm going to turn in these 3 massive scripts that my entire career is contingent upon. I'm going to do it. There's no question. It's insane.
Yeah, such a maniac. I mean, to
Yeah.
take on 3 scripts, you ultimately end up writing 3 scripts in 1 year that are all these huge, like landmark, like smash box office movies. Just goes to show like what a driven guy Cameron was, especially in the 80s here.
So Cameron's off to shoot Terminator, and Fox agrees to wait until Terminator's done before proceeding with Aliens. And in the meantime, David Giler approaches Fox and says, what do you think about Cameron being the director for Aliens? And they kind of balk at it. They're like, what? He's done Piranha 2, and we don't even know if Terminator is going to be a success or not. Let's see how Terminator turns out. Obviously, let's flash forward a year. Terminator is a success. It goes over very well. And this is a huge turning point for Cameron and his producing partner, collaborative creative partner, since they were at the Roger Corman's film school, his partner, Gale Hurd. She was Cameron's producer on Terminator and was with him for many years afterward, just collaborative partner, and would eventually jump on board with Aliens. And, in the mid-'80s, it's not like it was across the board that people didn't really respect women, but, Fox didn't necessarily think that this no-name woman who's produced a couple of pieces could produce a giant movie like Aliens. So James Cameron says, I have a producer. Perfect. You need that? Gale and Hurd. She's my collaborative partner. And Hurd has said numerous times that Fox said to her, how can a little girl like you produce a movie like this? And I don't know how many out there have dealt with such a demeaning situation, but just imagine the high pressure moment of that, of trying to hold your composure and just going, why don't you just go ahead and check my references and then we'll talk after that. As of early 1985, Cameron finishes the script for Fox and turns it in, and Fox takes a look at this and thinks, oh, this budget's going to be a little out of control, and overestimates the budget to be around $32 million. Gale and Hurd is like, there's no way it's going to be that much. We can get this down. I mean, Hurd and Cameron come from old school, filmmaking where you are shooting on a shoestring budget, and they've got a bright idea on how to get that budget down.
Yeah, at the time, it seemed like a good idea for them. I don't know if that was, in retrospect, the best thing that they did for the production, but at the time, but they got the bright idea to shoot in Britain at Pinewood Studios because of the tax credits. The government, if you shoot it there, they'll fund part of your project. So they pitched the idea to Fox, well, we could shoot it in Britain, we can bring the budget down, we can get more bang for our buck. And that seemed like a good idea. Things worked a little bit differently there. It meant that they were going to have to use a British crew that was already put together for them. And there was going to be a lot of personality differences and different work ethics, but they weren't worried about that at the time. At the time, they were just like, we need to get this budget down so that we can get the green light from Fox to start shooting.
All right, so they've got the budget worked out, but then maybe even, I don't know, just as equal as a terrible hurdle to jump over, Fox says to Cameron, so this whole Ripley thing in the script, do we really need Ripley in here? And Cameron has written this entire script literally with a picture of Sigourney Weaver by him, like, the whole time. I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but I kind of believe it, actually. And Cameron and Hurd are like, yes, of course. Like, she is on every page. She is Alien. There's no continuation of the story without Ripley. And they refuse to budge on that one. So Fox is still kind of putting the brakes on this. Cameron and Hurd are not moving at all either. And Cameron kind of goes behind everybody's back and gets the script to Sigourney, who is in England at the time, shooting the movie Half Moon Street. In that little part of time, Sigourney's getting the script, and Hurd and Cameron, who are also in a relationship, I don't think we said that initially, but they say, look, Fox, we're going to go get married. We're going to have our honeymoon. And by the time we get back, this needs to be figured out, or we're going to take this and go somewhere else. But there is no way in hell we're proceeding without Sigourney Weaver's involvement in this.
And yeah, that really just shows how little Fox thought of Sigourney Weaver as being a big part of what made the movie work. And Sigourney Weaver, I think, was a little peeved that it was this far along and that no one, Fox, no one had contacted her other than James Cameron, who didn't have full support of Fox to begin with. But she did end up getting a pretty good deal. She got $1 million, which doesn't sound like a lot for a starring role in a big, huge movie that's already starting the franchise. But at the time, and also being a woman, that was a pretty big payday. So that ended up working out. And thankfully, Cameron and Gale and Hurd stood their ground, because I don't know that the movie would have been as interesting without her character. And I think she's the main reason why Aliens works so well. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the next discussion. But thankfully, Fox came around and there was this, good relationship between Cameron and Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney Weaver really responded to the script, and she did have some, things to work out with Cameron, because she knew this character really well, inside and out. And Cameron was, trying to have her character be more progressive in the next movie, but also remain the same in some ways. Once that was worked out with Sigourney Weaver, the next step was we need to get ourselves to Britain, get set up with a crew, and the big hurdle is trying to figure out how they're going to do all these special effects, because it was a very effects heavy script that had more aliens in it and a bigger pumped up action sequences. So at this point, Terminator had come out. It was a moderate success at the box office, but really showed James Cameron as a visionary filmmaker, a writer, director, someone who was comfortable with special effects, someone who had a very keen visual style. And so 20th Century Fox was a little bit more comfortable. They were also glad that him and Gale and Hurd had figured out a way to trim the budget down. So Cameron gets to England, and Terminator hadn't come out overseas yet. So no one knew who Cameron was. The British system was very different. Crews worked for the studios. They're just looking as this like another movie's coming to the studio. They didn't know who James Cameron was. They knew Ridley Scott. They knew some of the crew had worked on Alien. They had a very different structure than Hollywood. You didn't just jump into the director's chair right away. Generally you were an older person who had worked on crews for a while, and then finally, it's like you get the go ahead to make your first movie after you've done all this stuff. Cameron didn't really have a very big resume. So the British crew has this American coming in with his American producer wife, which, immediately there was all these, I think, accusations thrown around. I'm like,
you're just his wife. You're not
yeah,
who's really behind this.
So the crew immediately didn't respect Cameron. They didn't respect Gale and Hurd as the producer. And 20th Century Fox doesn't really have a whole lot of muscle to help because they're all the way overseas. So there's not really anybody there that's holding Cameron up. Thankfully, he did have Gale and Hurd, because I don't think Cameron has any issues with his confidence, but it did help to have Gale and Hurd, a producer who's backing all his decisions and who's trying to convince the crew to work with him, because right away they're at each other's throats. James Cameron was like very driven. He was expecting people to do what they do in America, and it's like work every single day, work 16-hour days on the movie. He hadn't heard of tea time, and we're going to shut down everything so that they can wheel in the cart and everybody has tea and they're all like relaxing for like 15 or 20 minutes. Cameron thought, well, if I show the crew Terminator, it hasn't come out over here yet, maybe that will convince them that I actually know what I'm doing and that I can make a really good movie. And so he set up a private screening for the crew to come to see Terminator. And unfortunately, nobody showed up, which is just, man,
awful.
I mean, that's so awkward and horrible. And so, things did not get off on the right foot here. It's very similar to what we talked about in The Godfather, where Coppola just like didn't have the confidence of the studio, didn't have the confidence of the crew, and just seemed like every single day was like another challenge. But I don't think that as many directors have the gumption and the wherewithal that Cameron does to just kind of like compartmentalize all the hate that you're getting from people and all the uncertainty that people have in you, and just focus on what's ahead and say, what I really want to do is I have a very specific idea of what I want to execute here, and we need to do it like no matter what it takes, and you're either with me or you're out. And that, of course, isn't the best angle to take, when you're trying to win people over, but it seemed like from the get-go, Cameron and Gale and Hurd weren't making any friends, so they were just like, we have to go for the throat if we're gonna get this done. Otherwise, this thing's gonna like just spiral out of control very quickly, which it sort of did. Now, in any given movie, the relationship between the director and the actors generally is the most important. That needs to be functioning, and they need to be on the same page. But as equally strong would be the relationship between the director and the director of photography, especially if you're a director who has a specific vision on how you want your movie to look. James Cameron is very specific. He is the kind of person that would grab a camera and set things up, and this is how I want it to look, and is sketching out ideas, and has a very keen sense on how he wants things to be lit and look. And his relationship with the cinematographer on Aliens was immediately just sour. Dick Bush, the cinematographer, just did not like Cameron's approach. He didn't like his ideas. Cameron wanted a very dark look for Aliens. It seemed like every time Cameron would try to ask for something, Dick Bush would almost do the exact opposite. You can guess that after going that route for about a week or so, they were at each other's throats.
And Dick Bush even said from the get-go to Gale and Hurd when he saw the production schedule, there really weren't any days off. It was pretty cutthroat. He just said, you know what, the schedule's not going to work for me. It's too much, and I have no intention of making it work. That should have been a giant red flag right at the beginning that Dick Bush is going to have a problem with everything before they even start production.
Yeah, your schedule doesn't work with me. What?
And going back to the idea of this being at Pinewood Studios, you have a built-in crew. Some of these people, this is a 9 to 5 or 8 to 10 hour job, and they're not caring what they're really working on. It's a job. I think there was maybe a bit of that, but I think even more with Dick Bush, it sounded like he kind of wanted to be a problem in hopes that since, Cameron really wasn't anyone, no one really respected him or gave a crap what he'd worked on before, thought that, well, if this guy throws a fit, I might be the next guy that's going to direct Aliens. Whatever his reasoning behind it, when you're the DP going against your director, it's not going to last very long. So as you could guess, he was fired. He was replaced with Adrian Biddle, and this was Biddle's first feature film. He had previously worked with Tony and Ridley Scott's commercial production company, so kind of had a flavor of Alien under his belt.
And crewed on the original Alien as well.
Mm-hmm. And you might think that firing the director of photography might get some of the crew to think, okay, we all need to get in line, make sure that this ship is righted and we can get through this. No, that's not what happened. The next thorn in the side of this production was the first assistant director, David Cracknell. And I mean, the first AD, that's a pretty high up position to be having a problem with the director and trajectory of the film. Cracknell kind of served as the voice of the crew, and I don't think instead of being a person to communicate between the crew and the director, was someone that was kind of poking and not helping anything to do with the production, even talking inappropriately to Cameron. Even Lance Henriksen, who plays Bishop, kind of like got a little handsy with him a little bit, and Henriksen was like, you don't need to be touching me like that, Going along with that, I think that there's some type of, not a language barrier, but maybe how people interact with each other, how British folks or how British crew interacts with each other versus Americans, that there might just be some things that are lost in translation, that maybe Cracknell didn't mean something that was offensive and it's taken a different way. But however it is, the bridge of communication was breaking down with Cracknell. He was known to repeatedly call Cameron governor, like talking down to him, like, sure, you're going to tell me to do something, I'm going to talk down to you, like you don't really deserve the position that you're in. And this really wasn't going to fly. So with everyone feeling kind of pushed to their limits, the crew feels that too much is put upon them. Hurd and Cameron feel like they have time and budget constraints and don't really understand how the crew can behave so comfortably and nonchalantly, like this isn't something urgent and they should be pressed and stressed just like Cameron and Hurd are. Cracknell stands up for the crew and says, look, people are overworked. The working conditions are not to our standards and we don't have any days off. This needs to change. Without being there, you can't really say what's what. I can understand being in that position, that really sucking. But when you're an American crew and you are used to, American culture is kind of used to overworking and doing your job, especially in filmmaking, a particular way. And yeah, it's not going to gel. And it certainly didn't here. Cracknell was fired. And as soon as he was fired, the crew walked out. And the production of Aliens had a mutiny on its hands.
Hearing this kind of stuff, it's like you wonder how this movie even came out as good as it did.
Yeah, right?
Because you have to take into consideration, too, this was a huge movie. They had 3 stages 2 stages for different special effects scenes, and then a stage that had like a lot of the action sequences that included the actors. And so Cameron's like running from stage to stage, trying to deal with all these logistics, trying to answer technical questions. Meanwhile, the whole time he's got like a crew that just like loathes him. He's still managing to get footage shot, continue to work with the special effects team to like, make sure things are like on schedule and working. It's really kind of like crazy to me how well Cameron is able to, again, compartmentalize all of this stress and all of this insanity and still able to look ahead and say, no, at the end of the day, I'm still like, I'm forcing myself to like, I want to make this movie that's going to be awesome.
And it's hard to say in anything other than hindsight, if we were all just on the same page and wanted to create this vision, because I know from hearing stories from Gale and Hurd and James Cameron that the work that the British crew did on everything that they did was impeccable, like some of the most top-notch work that they'd ever seen, and certainly even in the future, like they were experts. But the lack of respect was the problem. If everyone had just been on board in the beginning, probably none of this would have ever happened. But with this mutiny on their hands, Hurd describes this as one of the probably most difficult thing she's had to deal with in her entire professional career. So something had to change. Conversations needed to be had, and one person that did step in, I mean, not like as a big to-do, but stepped in as kind of the person between the crew and Cameron. She knew some of the crew from previous Alien, was Sigourney Weaver, and stepped in and talked to Cameron and Hurd, and I feel like she's probably the only person that could bridge that. I'm not really clear on how she talked Cameron down or got them to maybe rethink firing Cracknell, but it seems like it came down to Sigourney and Gale and Hurd to facilitate this apology that Cameron would give the crew and say, look, this movie is going to be amazing. We do have to work together. I know that this is very stressful for everyone, and I know that I've been a giant a-hole, but I'm apologizing. I really want this to work. And it was kind of like the only time that the crew had seen him be an actual human and show any type of, I wouldn't go as far as to say warmth, but to show any type of emotion. I wouldn't say desperation either, but something bordering on that something other than just inhuman, asshole-ish behavior. And I don't think that there was an ultimatum given about hiring back Cracknell, but that's what they did. And hiring him back is what got the crew back on board. And with that, what divided everyone in the first place ultimately is what brought them back together, in thinking that, okay, we just need to put this aside and just get this immensely difficult project done and under our belt. And it's kind of like thanks to Sigourney and I think Gale and Hurd.
And what James Cameron learned a valuable lesson that day after talking to the crew and showing his appreciation, which so many managers in this world should take note, that a little thanks and appreciation goes a long way, longer than you think it would. Once the crew felt respected, things started moving smoothly, though there was still a long road ahead. This was a very technical shoot. There was a lot of moving parts as far as like creating this whole universe, this whole world of these aliens and this colony set that they're at, that they're spending the majority of the time in the movie in. And thankfully, once things were smooth out with the crew, Cameron could focus 100% on making this movie what it is.
And luckily, one department that never got any guff from James Cameron was headed by Stan Winston, who was in charge of all the special effects, visual effects. And that was because Stan Winston had worked with Cameron before and didn't really have a problem with him and respected his vision, knew exactly what he was like already, but kind of served as the buffer. So luckily that was one department to start with. And yeah, let's get into some special effects and everything that makes Aliens what it is.
And a lot of this stuff, Stan Winston was able to work out before they went to England, in his own workspace. He was able to figure out structurally how to make some of the mechanics work. They obviously already had like a blueprint of some of the stuff, like the face huggers and the big alien. They wanted to keep some of the look of the original film, but also bring something new in, so the audiences had something new to see, to look forward to. And this idea of there being like tons of these other aliens and like eggs hatching and another bigger chest bursting scene.
A queen.
Yes, a queen. Not to get into the whole big debate of like, again, like practical and CGI and all that stuff, but I've watched this movie multiple times in the last few weeks, and the effects do still really, really hold up. Some of these effects are like very simple, like watching some of the behind the scenes special effects documentary, them like pulling a face hugger by a string and then doing some reverse camera, old school reverse camera techniques. James Cameron realizing that these scenes can be put together in a way where you're not going to see strings, you're not going to see all the hidden effects, and that it's going to come together and look like a seamless action scene. Because there's probably like 5 or 6 pretty big set pieces here where we have actors interacting with the aliens, and a lot of what happens in the later Alien films where Cameron was still using the less is more. We're not going to show this thing nonstop. I think that's what made Alien so scary and terrifying. Once we get to some of the other sequels, we're starting to see these aliens so much on screen more than the actors that I don't know. The more I see a monster in any monster movie, the less scary it becomes. Cameron visualized this movie as like very dark and very gritty, and the style of this movie is different from Alien, and it is much more an action movie. There's a lot of guns and that kind of special effects going on, and mechanical special effects and explosions that wasn't needed in the first movie, because the first movie is more insulated and it's a little more intimate. The crew has known each other for a while. This one, we have this like pumped up Marine crew that has to be led by someone that they just, are introduced to, Ripley. When they have their big meeting in the beginning, she really doesn't offer too much information. This is like the worst thing that anyone could possibly face. And immediately they're like, okay, let's go kill this thing.
I love the way that that's set up, though, because it shows the attention to the depth of a character, because she's traumatized. I mean, this thing that happened on her previous ship was like 3 days ago. So in trying to impart like, no, this thing just killed my entire crew and you guys don't care, it's obvious that Cameron's really trying to show like Ripley is like, I'm talking to people that don't care, but I don't know how else to impart this information that we're all gonna friggin' die unless you pay attention. But yeah, I love the setup for that scene. You and pretty much everyone else who loves this movie, the sequence between Ripley in the power loader suit and the Queen is iconic. Like it's an incredible scene. I loved learning that in that power loader suit that it is a giant muscle-bound dude that's in that, and Sigourney's basically standing on the tops of his feet, so they're working kind of in tandem. Also with the Queen, every movie that we talk about, there's so much about creature construction and so much, how they come up with like the concept of the alien had been around, but the Queen was a whole new thing. This was a 14-foot puppet and ended up being something that was controlled. I think it took up to 14 to 16 people to control it. Like the head was on hydraulics. It had a steering wheel, the neck and face were all controlled by hydraulics. Her legs were on rods, and just being puppeted by this many people at once. I mean, it's wacky to think about. Like, and you see it on screen, and you don't see the strings. You don't see any of this moving, and the way that she moves is spider bug-like and looks completely natural in this thing that is not anything that we've ever seen before. That scene is just one of my favorites. Also, if you ever notice, the Queen, her teeth. You notice this, Justin? Her teeth are different than your typical minion. Your typical minion, like these other fiery, beastly creatures that are metallic teeth. Hers are translucent. What's that about? I love it.
It's all those little weird details.
Yeah. Even with the face huggers, like they altered them a little bit. The original ones in Alien were made of, horseshoe crab and oyster and like grossness, like realness. And even those are slightly altered and how they are, and just the adaptations that they added to make everything look different are just pretty fascinating.
I feel like they still stuck with the whole making everything really slimy looking.
Slimy and like
wet.
kind of wet and oddly, I'm not off base here, oddly sexual. Like there's some
a little bit.
There's some stuff going on there. Also with this power loader and queen scene, you might not even notice that with the actual, real size Sigourney and 14-foot puppet, that there are miniatures of both of these put into the same scene, and you're not going to be able to tell. I even knowing that, going back and looking at it, I can't really pick it out. It happens so fast. The cuts are just like impeccably done. But those miniatures are just one example of the myriad of scenes with miniatures using forced perspective and like that foreground. Like in the original Alien, they used a lot of matte paintings. And in this one, it was a lot of a whole soundstage that was built at a smaller scale. So it was just a giant miniature set. But it's kind of like the blending of Ridley Scott's world of using those matte paintings and then kind of transitioning over to something that's the same kind of vibe, but something that Cameron was very familiar with because of where he originally came from and what he was most familiar with, the tools that he was most familiar with.
And speaking of those matte paintings, one of the things that Cameron really wanted to emphasize in Aliens was he had said in a lot of science fiction movies, they would use rear projection or they would move the camera around when they're showing a ship moving. But he said when they would cut to the inside of the window looking outside of the ship, that would just be a still matte painting and there was no movement. And he didn't like that. So he wanted to use rear projection and move the camera around so that way it matched the outside of the ship. And so he utilized that several times in Aliens. And again, that's not going back to talking about using these sort of like primitive effects and camera effects. These had been used for years and years, but Cameron knows that technique very well. And so he was able to use it in a way that's like more seamless and that was going to help make the universe realistic versus it looking like sort of like a cheesy camera effect.
What you just said reminded me of another really cool effect when the ship takes off with Bishop, Sigourney, Newton, Hicks. They think they've escaped. The mushroom cloud that they leave behind is cotton and fiberglass illuminated with a light bulb underneath, and we have this miniature ship taking off. You would never know that. It looks so flawless. Just how that's done. I'm not sure what exactly that's called when you have like two miniatures working on top of each other like that, but it is a really cool scene and seems relatively simple. And also another simple effect of mirroring that they use to it's in the very beginning. I don't know how many Marines we have in total in the beginning before they start getting picked off, but everybody wakes up from their hypersleep pod and it looks like it's just an endless line of these pods, but it's really a couple mirrors that are set up to look like it's an endless line. And that was another great money-saving trick that Cameron's crew came up with.
I think it's pretty cool that Cameron used all these sort of like cheap B-movie tricks that he used on Roger Corman movies and brought them to like a huge studio, like super real-looking miniature model, but then utilizing some of these little tricks that he picked up along the way.
Yeah.
And consistently in a lot of Cameron's movies, and what I think makes good science fiction movies is his use of saying, all these tools and weapons that these guys are using, they look like something that would exist in the future that's similar to something that we have now, because essentially most technology is like something that we had before, but it's like there's an advancement made. And so like the little welder tool that they use in throughout the movie where they're opening stuff and closing it back up, it's like a little handheld, like, they can open anything that's like steel and metal and then seal it back up really tight. And the gunnery pack that Vasquez is using, it's like almost like wraps around her whole body. All these little props and weapons and tools makes this universe feel real.
And the operators of a lot of those weapons, and really the aspect of Aliens that keeps us grounded, is the entire cast, giant cast behind this movie. So let's go to another clip and we'll come back and we'll talk about it.
Well, that's great. That's just fucking great, man. Now what the fuck are we supposed to do? We're some real pretty shit now, man.
You finished?
You all right?
I guess we're not going to be leaving now, right?
I'm sorry, Newt.
You don't have to be sorry. It wasn't your fault.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over. What the fuck are we gonna do now? What are we gonna do?
Maybe we could build a fire, sing a couple of songs, huh? Why don't we try that?
We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
We talked quite a bit about Sigourney Weaver when we did Alien, so we'll, scoot past Sigourney.
Not like she has anything to do with the movie or anything.
I mean, we've only talked about her like 100 times on this podcast. It's still crazy to me that the studio was like, do we need Sigourney Weaver's character for this movie? I think she's the main reason why this sequel is as good as it is. I think if they would have went with a completely different lead, that it just wouldn't have the same strength that it does.
No way.
And the cast that they surround her with is really, really great. I'm glad that Michael Biehn is in this movie, that he had the 1, 2, 3 with James Cameron, and that necessarily wasn't going to happen. I didn't realize this till just recently that he wasn't even cast in Aliens.
Yeah, I was not aware of that either, that originally the character of Hicks was played by James Remar. Some of you might know him best as Dexter's dad in the Showtime series Dexter, or Samantha's on-again, off-again boyfriend in Sex and the City. Of course, we did an episode on The Warriors. He's a prominent character in that movie.
And I want to say this is like relatively new information, because whenever we were doing the research for this, even on those other old documentaries that came out, the making of Aliens, Michael Biehn says that he replaced somebody, but there's really no discussion on who it was or what happened. And that Netflix recently put out an episode of the movies that made us on Aliens, and James Remar is interviewed in it, and he starts the interview up, and then immediately I was like, wait a minute, James Remar's on Aliens, and then it made the connection, like, whoa, okay, so it was originally James Remar who was cast, and they started shooting with James Remar, and then he got busted with drugs in his like hotel room. Yeah. And said that he's gone sober since, cleaned himself up, but he felt really bad. He got fired because he did, I think he ended up going to jail. They arrested him and took him to jail. Yeah. And Cameron called Michael Biehn and said, get on the plane, get over here. We need you to shoot in like 2 days. And so he didn't know the character. He shows up 2 days later, puts on the uniform that James Remar had been wearing, and just picks up. And that's crazy. I mean, talk about dedicated actor to, probably only maybe he got to read the script on the plane, but probably not, It
is pretty wild. Gale and Hurd said she called him on a Friday and he was on a plane on Monday. I think one of her questions was, how's your passport? Is that ready to go? Because we got to get moving.
There's several scenes in Aliens where it is James Remar's back, because they had already shot certain scenes and they didn't want to have to reshoot them. So they found scenes where they could use of him walking away, and then they just shot the front of Michael Biehn for a few scenes that they didn't have. And then, he was in the rest of the movie. Thankfully, they were only like 2 weeks into shooting. That would have been a travesty if they were like almost completed or halfway through. And I mean, how do you even deal with something like that?
I don't think you can.
James Remar could have ruined Aliens. Like he could have like potentially, I'm sure that probably weighed on him like good grief. Hicks is like through the whole movie.
Yeah. Hicks makes up the family kind of triad that there is between he and Sigourney and Newt. He's totally main character. He makes it out. I cannot imagine. And also, I love James Remar as an actor, but Michael Biehn has a completely different vibe. Not that he's softer necessarily. He's certainly chiseled and very handsome, but I don't know. It feels like a smoother transition, or a smoother kinship that he and Ripley would have, more so than James Remar. I mean, what am I basing that on? Vibe and appearance? I don't know, but that's what it feels like to me.
But I'm really happy that they went with Michael Biehn, and again, having this 1, 2, 3 through the 80s, working with being the main guy and Cameron's movies. And another main guy in Cameron's movies, Bill Paxton, who had a bit part in Terminator, went on to be in Titanic and True Lies. James Cameron really loves Paxton. They seem like they have a good friendship.
And these two going back to, being friends as far as Roger Corman's film school, like this goes back a long way. And when Cameron was writing Aliens, he actually ran into Paxton at an airport, and Paxton was like, "Hey, what are you working on?" And Cameron says, "I'm actually writing the sequel to Alien." And Paxton, as you would imagine, a guy like Bill Paxton says, "Hey, write me a good part." And 6 months later, he does go to audition for him, and not thinking that he's going to actually get the part. I think I heard him say numerous times, "Your friends are always the last people to hire you." And while that wasn't the case, although he did think he bombed the audition, Cameron called him up and offered him the part. And just for you trivia folks out there, Paxton turned down Police Academy 3 to be in Aliens. I think that was a good call. And Bill Paxton, he's taken a long time to grow on me. I'll say that. In Aliens, specifically, when I was a kid, he was never my favorite. And now, years later, and many viewings after, I really see the character of Hudson as the audience. For instance, in his death scene, that's when I feel like the ground has just been ripped out from underneath me. That's when I have no idea what's going to happen. How are we ever going to make it out of this situation? And it's because Hicks is the one that you identify with. He's freaking out. He's kind of a blowhard a little bit. Bill Paxton is always great at being a blowhard. But once his character eats it, you're like, well, no one's going to make it out of this.
When I used to watch this as a kid, he just seemed like the goofy character. I mean, I always liked him. But watching Aliens now, it's clear his character is so essential because he is the audience to us. And when he's so confident in the beginning and so cocky, but then ends up being the one who's like super scared, it totally ups the stakes and it makes the movie that much more scary because you're like, oh man, this guy was not scared of anything. And he was like ready to charge in with his guns. And now he's totally freaking out and like, we're going to die.
Yeah.
And in a lot of action movies, the secondary characters, tough guys like that, they never get scared. So you're never really scared for them because if they're not worried, the audience isn't worried. And Cameron, I think, is good at doing that, is like having like a central character like show fear and like be unsure of that they can handle this situation.
Another tricky thing that Cameron does is take a character who you feel like should be scared and make them one of the bravest out of them all. And that comes in a little package by the name of Newt, played by Carrie Henn.
And I think, as most Hollywood directors would say, it's risky just having a child actor in a movie. It's hard to get them to perform. They're not always the most professional of actors with a lot of experience. They can only shoot so many hours in a day legally. And Cameron not only uses a kid, but like puts a kid in an action movie in some very terrifying sequences, especially when you have really good actors around. Someone who just doesn't have the experience, it's going to stick out. Good on Cameron, good on the casting of this to find somebody who really did a great job. And it's nuts to me that Carrie Henn this is her only movie. She just did this and that was it.
Yeah, to not pursue acting after doing a movie like Aliens, that's a bold move. And she was actually one of the members of the British cast that were used in this film. And 3,000 actors of the British Actors Equity had to be auditioned before they could even go to North American actors. And one of the most interesting things I heard when Gale and Hurd was talking about casting for a young role like this was that so many child actors that they auditioned were commercial actors. And every time they delivered a line, they would smile at the end. And oh my God, can you imagine playing Newt and, you deliver the lines that that girl doesn't crack a smile at all. And Carrie Henn had no professional training, hadn't been in even a school play. But in the end, that's what served her so well and what landed her the role.
And that's funny to me that all these kids were like, they're so used to smiling in commercials and smiling real big. And so it was a perfect choice to find someone who didn't have like all these sort of like trained in and habitual things that they had been doing. Her character's like, her family's been wiped out. She's been living at this colony alone while these things are lurking around. And I think she delivers one of the most scary lines in the movie is that, we should, hide pretty soon. They seem to come out more in the evenings, and just psychologically, you're just like, God, she's been like totally like locked away. And in the beginning, it seems like it could be annoying. It's like, oh man, now they got this kid and she's like running around and like isn't speaking. But then they show that there's a bond between her and Ripley. I really like the new character. I think that it also shows another side of Ripley. Like it gives her a reason to fight, and she has maternal instincts kick in, and she wants to protect Newt from, especially after all that she's been through. If Newt can survive this, then at least maybe we'll make up for this entire colony. It's been like completely like annihilated from these aliens.
And also the daughter that she didn't get to watch grow up, that has since died since she was in 7 years of hypersleep. The other thing that I can't help but notice about Newt and the sequel to Aliens, Ripley has to go back for Newt. She's escaped. Newt's been captured. She's in a cocoon. She's got to go back for her, just like she did for Jonesy. It's the same kind of evolution of this mother instinct, which is awesome that Cameron keeps that train rolling, because it is something that is so persistent throughout the franchise. Most obviously, because it is the xenomorph, the alien is the, it impregnates you and gestates, and, that there's that theme. But the whole undercurrent of two mothers fighting, that being the alien and Ripley, I just love that theme. And I love that it gets brought back around. Jonesy, the cat, is left safely back at home, but we're left to save Newt.
And I keep going back to Cameron here, like referencing his script writing, because I do think it's undervalued a lot of times. We've seen so many terrible sequels where there's just like winks and fan service and all kinds of stuff. And granted, this was a different time when this movie came out. They weren't just trying to do fan service, but bringing something back that we've seen in the other movie. And Cameron does that with the synthetic of Bishop. And, in the first Alien, we see that this has been a very evil character. And so when it's introduced that there's a synthetic, Ripley's immediately like pissed off and like, keep that thing away from me. And
it's awesome how like angry she is immediately.
Just disturbed. And it's a very Cameron move to take a character who was evil in the first one and then flip it around and make them good, in the sequel, kind of like he did with the Terminator in 1 and 2. It is a cool thing to not have him be evil and that essentially like help Ripley at the end. And also you feel when he gets like ripped apart, even though it's a synthetic, it's still like there's like an emotional drive there that's pretty graphic. And
it's awful.
Yeah, awful scene. But Lance Henriksen, who had a bit part in Terminator, and someone also who's friends with Cameron, and Lance Henriksen is like, he's like the king of B-movie sci-fi.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just like relentlessly been in so many of these sci-fi movies. And when you see interviews with him, he seems like, he's like, hey, I'm happy that I have this life. And he's been in some really awesome movies and some just really like grade Z, bad.
Grade Z.
In Aliens, he's really great. And I think he does have that very calm, like the way he speaks is like very calming. He can be very warm, but also very cold. I think it's the best version of any time that they've done a synthetic in the Alien franchise. He's put in the best performance.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I totally feel that Lance Henriksen is the best version of a synthetic or robot in the Alien franchise. Ian Holm as Ash in the original is superb compared to Lance Henriksen. And maybe it's, the evolution of the synthetic. And even Lance Henriksen, says, I'm not surprised. That version was flawed. He seems more robotic. And Lance Henriksen, like you said, the right balance of warm and cold. But he still feels, not completely human. Maybe it's his baby ashen white skin, too, that adds to that.
Yeah. And also, too, I think that Ian Holm's version of the synthetic feels almost like homage to HAL in 2001.
Yes.
Whereas the Lance Henriksen version feels like its own thing. It's like this new model that is, can we trust it? Can we not?
And for being such a clean-cut character, even though a synthetic, Henriksen is pretty rough around the edges, a little primitive, and he's a tough dude, and pretty much the exact opposite of who he would frequently ride to work with while filming, which was Paul Reiser, who played Burke. For a lot of fans of Aliens, Paul Reiser's the one that sticks out like a sore thumb. He does to me, but I like that he does. He doesn't fit. He's not supposed to fit. He's clearly the villain. So when I'm watching Aliens and it dawns on me that, oh yeah, Paul Reiser is in this, it's not like, it's the guy from Mad About You. I'm like, oh no, it's this total a-hole that reveals who he truly is, that he's a scumbag that would rather throw any of these Marines straight in front of him than actually have any balls behind him. But Paul Reiser does a great job.
I think he does a good job. He's the only thing in Aliens that I'm not the biggest fan of, and I do fall in that category of the...
Yeah.
And mainly because it feels very one note. It's kind of like the one character where it's like government is bad or like corporations are bad, and it's like so just one note.
Very Cameron, though.
Very Cameron. But you make a character that despicable, it's as satisfying when they die, you know, so it's like one alien kill that, you know, you're almost kind of rooting for. And I'm glad too that they don't spend a enormous amount of time with him doing the double cross. You know, it's kind of dealt with pretty quickly in the movie. We don't have it be like in the third act, like stretching out that long. So I think it's, you know, he's in, he's out.
And really, he never confesses to anything. It's only his anxiety sweats that he tried to make Ripley and Newt these carriers so he could smuggle this alien back to the company that they work for.
Yeah. Locking him in that room's pretty effed up.
Oof. God. I mean, that's when everybody else realizes that's what happens. It's like, yeah, we should off this guy.
Yeah.
Totally. There really are so many people to talk about in this ensemble cast. I mean, Mark Ralston, who plays Drake, totally wonderful. Apone, Al Matthews, man, you didn't last long. And for being an actor who was the only guy with actual military experience, it does kind of suck for you. You didn't make it longer.
It does come across, though, that he really is, has military experience. He's very believable.
Gorman, William Hope, I'm surprised you made it as long as you did. But your death scene was with, I'd say, one of the most beloved Marines of this entire ensemble, and that was Vasquez, played by Jeanette Goldstein.
She's one of the more memorable characters in the movie. She kind of predates the pumped up version of Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2. You know, this is 1986, so it's like generally you can only have one strong female lead in the movie. And, you know, Cameron is able to squeeze in a second one because he's Cameron. And why can't there be a strong female lead in an action movie?
Clearly, her character, I mean, it wasn't written for because Cameron wrote it, but I mean, normally that character would be a man. But the way that she's written, the camaraderie that she has with everyone else, it is so inclusive that it doesn't feel, I mean, aside from like some one-off jokes she razzes people back just as much as Hudson or Drake gives her any guff, she serves it right back to him.
And Cameron used her again for Terminator 2 as John Connor's foster mom. And she looks so different in that movie.
I completely forgot that she was in that until you just said it. Before we close out the cast real quickly, in case there were any questions, because this is a super gun-heavy, military-heavy action movie, all of the actors, aside from Sigourney Weaver, Paul Reiser, and Lance Henriksen, and of course Newt, they all went through like 2 weeks of rigorous training on how to hold a weapon with special forces officers. There's definitely an air of legitimacy throughout the whole picture. So I think that, you know, there's sometimes you can watch some action movies and it does seem a little, I don't know, clunky. Sometimes it is not that in Aliens. And yeah, I'd say 2 weeks of training. Yeah, that'll whip you into shape.
And if you want to see a big difference, like if you really are a fan of 80s B movies, or C movies, which I can get into sometimes. Watching those now, it's like, man, you really do see the clunkiness of like they gave no training to someone who's never held a gun, and it just doesn't look like believable or menacing. It just makes the scene, it kind of takes you out of it. And this is a movie where, you know, you have the top tier version of having people look like they know how to use all this equipment.
Yeah. Sigourney Weaver, who was notoriously very anti-gun, and Man, finding out that she didn't really realize how gun heavy the movie was because she doesn't read the stage directions in the script. Hearing that afterwards, you're like, oh my God, this movie is all guns. But it took her a little while to come around. She actually suggested to Cameron, does Ripley have to have a gun? He's like, yeah, she has to. But she came around, and I mean, it's obvious that it's needed in the plot, you know.
I love when there's interviews. It was like one of the documentaries we watch. There's like interviews of her talking about her stance on guns, and then, yeah, you know, I don't really like them. And then it's like it cuts to Bill Paxton. He's like, oh man, I love it. You know, he's like, I used to shoot guns when I was younger. You know?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference when it comes to comfortability with guns in this movie.
Earlier we were talking about Michael Biehn, how he was hired very quickly. He didn't have much time to prepare, had to kind of just jump right in and do this movie. Well, James Horner is the Michael Biehn of the music composition world. It was the same situation for him. He didn't really know anything about the movie, was hired very, very quickly and given very, very little time to prepare a score for a huge, you know, Hollywood release. And granted, James Horner, one of the greatest composers of all time, not insane that he was able to come up with something so great for the movie, but you know, the time crunch and the circumstance surrounding it is a pretty amazing feat.
And that time crunch just kept getting smaller and smaller. Like, it was 6 weeks from the release date, and Horner had not seen a cut of the movie or started writing the score, you know, let alone like started recording. We hadn't even got to that point. He knew the general concept, and for someone that is as talented as he is, he can come up with a melody, but without knowing particular beats, I mean, you're going to have an incomplete score. Eventually, a cut does come around to him. He does score it, not having the music printed or anything for musicians to perform it, but working up to that. And 2 days before recording is set to go, there are massive edits and changes to the film, which is going to completely alter your entire score. And Horner, the drift I got was that he's a very together, controlled guy, but a perfectionist like Cameron described this experience as inhuman to expect someone to be able to make such massive edits in 2 days and be able to get all of this music together, write it, send it to copyists, have it out for musicians to perform it. I mean, it's nuts. And he said this to Cameron and Hurd, and I got to give it to Gale and Hurd for being such a ball buster. She said something like, well, if you can't do it, we'll find somebody who can. And James Horner, again, very controlled, says something like, I'd like to meet that person, whoever can do that, because I don't know one person that could. It was like 5 or 6 days when this needed to be complete. Somehow the dude cranked it out. I don't know how or how much hair he pulled out of his head to make this happen, to record it and it be such a masterpiece that it is. But like, there's kind of 2 climaxes in Aliens, and the music in that, if that doesn't rev your heart up and make you just like want to pass out from like the building anxiety and tension, I mean, I don't know what will. And that piece specifically is used in multiple action movie trailers, like subsequently.
So many trailers that have used that. Dun-dun, dun-dun, like something's about to explode.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? It really is one of the best scores that I feel like has resonated with me, that I know it so well. And for a film score that sometimes they're understated, sometimes they stick out, but for one to have such an emotional impact and to be written on a deadline.
I mean, what a talent. This is James Horner's version of like cranking something out. Like, yeah, just like cranked this out. This like, you know, and his relationship with Cameron clearly didn't sour. He went on to score Titanic and win the Academy Award and, you know, several other awards for compositions.
I think they needed some time apart because it was a little like, I don't think anyone was mad or any bad blood, but it was like certainly 2 perfectionists were like, I don't know what you're going to do, but we're going to make this work out. But yeah, coming back around, that shows how pro they are and that they know that they can trust someone with their level of intelligence and follow through. Well, the final theatrical cut of this movie ended up being just a little over 2 hours, which Luckily, with so many things running on such a tight schedule, the first rough cut, edited by Ray Lovejoy, ended up being pretty close to what Cameron wanted, which I would think would be such a relief for someone editing this movie together when you're on a time crunch. But the main reason that the studio wanted it to be, not too shy over 2 hours, and I guess this is a pretty common thing, was to maximize the amount of times a movie can be shown in a theater in one day. Makes total sense, but when you also understand, and if you're somebody who's seen the extended edition, and maybe we'll get to that, but when you know what was left on the cutting room floor, you're like, man, this could have gone a second longer and it wouldn't have felt long in the tooth.
It's crazy to me that just over 2 hours was lengthy for an action movie compared to today, where the new Batman movie that came out is clocked in at 3 hours and 8 minutes, and most of the Marvel movies are 2:45, 2:50. It's nuts, and this movie doesn't feel long to me at all. I think a good length for an action movie is 1:30, 1:45, depending on how simple the plot is and the setup of the characters. But with Aliens, it's we already know Sigourney Weaver's character. It's we know who Ripley is. We don't need to spend an hour setting her up like they do with every Spider-Man or Batman movie. It's just don't we all know these characters? Why do we have to spend the first hour relearning about the character again? But I think that's what's great about this movie, is that it just kind of kicks into overdrive right away instead of reiterating information, that we've already learned in the first movie.
This movie really just does not stop at all.
And speaking of the release of this movie was a pretty big hit. Definitely a big hit overseas as well, but in North America, it was the 7th highest grossing film of 1986.
The 7th?
I know. Isn't that crazy? I would have thought that it was in the top 3. And so I was, had to look this up.
Yeah.
And man, 1986 was a weird year for hit movies.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
The number 1 highest grossing film, no big surprise, for 1986, Top Gun.
Okay, sure.
Number 2, Crocodile Dundee, which I do remember that being this gargantuan hit. It
was pretty big. I know that movie well.
Number 3 is a little surprising here. Platoon.
Oof.
3rd highest grossing film in 1986.
Yikes, that's dark.
Then we go into sequel city here with Karate Kid Part 2.
Okay,
followed by Star Trek 4. They had built it up.
Okay.
Still not the Aliens yet. Before Aliens, though, 6th highest grossing film in 1986.
Okay.
Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield.
I mean, Dangerfield
made $90 million at the North American box office. And then we get to Aliens,
okay.
Rounding out the top 10 with The Golden Child, Ruthless People, which was a surprise to me.
I mean,
made it in the top 10. And
wow.
10th highest grossing movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Very
wow, this order would be so different nowadays.
Oh yeah, it would all be superhero movies.
Yeah, that's true.
Or sequels.
I mean, all of these movies have varying great degrees of merit, but I cannot believe Alien was number 7 out of all of those. Wow.
I think we can agree that out of this top 10, Aliens is the best movie of all these by a great distance.
Out of all, I'm collating, as Ash would say in Alien. Yes, completely.
Yeah.
Number 1 for me.
Me too.
And even though it was only the 7th highest grossing movie of 86, it's still, for a sci-fi horror war combat movie, it was recognized by the Academy Awards and nominated for 7 awards: Best Visual Effects, Sound Editing, Sound Mixing, Original Score, Production Design, Film Editing, and probably the biggest surprise, something that no one really expected, was Best Actress. Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Actress, and that's something that was unheard of for a sci-fi horror movie.
And Sigourney Weaver didn't win, but who did win? I had to think about that for a second. Who won Best Actress in 1987?
That was Marlee Matlin for Children of a Lesser God. A great actress.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Just, I don't know the last time I've talked about Children of a Lesser God.
I don't know the last time I don't think anyone's ever mentioned that movie to me in the million film conversations that I've had.
Everyone that was nominated, though, in this category was wonderful that year. Sigourney certainly, had to battle it out, but geez Louise, it's no secret we're a fan of Sigourney Weaver on this podcast.
this seems like a good place to stop. We'll come back to some aliens talk. We'll probably talk about those sequels, but let's get on with our picks of the week. Lindsay, what was your pick again?
Well, of course, I went the Sigourney Weaver route and did a movie called Death and the Maiden.
I've said it before, but you've just been on a freaking roll here with picks of the week of movies that I somehow managed to miss when they originally came out, and I still haven't watched Death of the Maiden yet. I've got to get on this, so I'm the most curious about what this movie's about. I didn't even look it up. I figured I'd just wait.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so
okay.
I'm hearing this as this is as fresh to my ears as it is to anyone listening to this episode right now.
Okay. Well, you may not have seen this, but you saying in the beginning of the episode that this was an adult drama, that is completely accurate. This is a very, very adult movie. I remember being intrigued by this movie because, well, one, Sigourney Weaver, and two, I love movies which began as plays. They're usually a pretty simple setup, but with a complex backstory, intelligent dialogue, and usually allows the audience to figure out the motivations for characters in the initial exposition. In the case of this Sigourney Weaver deep cut, we've walked into a weighty situation, finding a woman alone in her home in the middle of the night, obviously upset, a little perturbed. She looks a little paranoid as she repeatedly peers out her window. Piece by piece, as any good play does, our main character, Paulina, is revealed. Her curious paranoia becomes intensified as she overhears a news report on the radio about someone being named the leader of a commission to investigate horrific crimes from a former non-democratic regime. Then the power goes out. Sounds like the setup for a horror film, right? A lone, seemingly frightened woman riding a wave mixed with wine and feelings, a beach house, no neighbors, and now no power. This is somewhat of a horror story, just not the kind that you're used to. Paulina's husband, Gerardo, played by Stuart Wilson, returns home, out of sorts, having been given a ride home by a stranger after getting a flat tire. Paulina and Gerardo have some as-yet unidentified tension between them, revolving around what was overheard on the radio. Gerardo was named the person to head that investigative commission. But why does Paulina feel so betrayed? She's in so much pain, torment, and it's obvious to Gerardo, though he validates her feelings, but his decision to accept this position does go against her wishes. What are we missing here? A little later in the night, the man who drove Gerardo home returns for a seemingly innocuous reason. As soon as there's a rapping at the door, Paulina hides in the closet. Gerardo answers. The camera stays on Paulina, who's taking in every breath, every sound, every word coming from that stranger's voice. A small giggle of disbelief comes out as she covers her mouth. Geez, can this movie build tension or what? Let me just go ahead and break the news for you because it's the entire reason for the majority of this movie. As she will later expound upon in painfully great detail, many years before, Paulina was held prisoner at the hands of the abusive regime that Gerardo has now been named the head of the investigative commission. And when she hears this stranger in the night's voice, there is no question in her mind that this is the person responsible for her weeks of torture. What unfolds in Death and the Maiden is Paulina taking this man, Dr. Miranda, captive and enacting some version of a trial, using her husband as an attorney liaison between the two parties. Dr. Miranda, played ominously too well by Ben Kingsley, clings to his innocence the entire time, Gerardo caught in the middle, and Paulina, who is shaken but confident and methodical in her decision-making. She's waited for this moment but never planned that it could happen. The charges, Paulina says at one point, systematic beatings, electroshock treatments, multiple rapes while playing Death and the Maiden on a wobbly turntable with cheap speakers. I mean, it's a rough time every time that she describes what happens to her. Sigourney plays Paulina with such conflicted depth and confidence, a blend of madness and giddiness, all stemming from this unalterable trauma she's experienced. I swear that jawline for days on old Siggy has never looked stronger than in this movie. Written by an academic and human rights advocate, Ariel Dorfman, who also co-wrote the screenplay, Death and the Maiden pulls no punches in its graphic, real-talk language, but also leaves the audience questioning everyone. Both Paulina and Dr. Miranda are staunchly set in their positions, with attorney for the people Gerardo left not knowing what to think. Sometimes he leans one way, but feels conflicted because he doesn't fully understand the effect of his wife's trauma. Paulina plans to kill Dr. Miranda if he doesn't confess in this at-home version of a court trial. While you imagine this story unfolding, picture it set by mostly candlelight, adjacent lamps, single-beam flashlights, moonlight, all darkness outside in this lone home. The tension building inside is more palpable and prolonged than any awkward encounter most of us have ever experienced. Out of an immense respect for this story and the manner in which it's told, I just can't reveal the ending of this movie, but you have to see the entire movie through. How Sigourney reached the core of this character must have really weighed heavily on her because it is emotionally exhausting to experience it with her. The flawless vulnerability, strength, and madness encapsulated in a victim who spent every waking day affected by what happened to her. That's very real. It's difficult to imagine if you haven't lived through such a personalized trauma, but what Sigourney portrays gives such immense respect to women who have endured such anguish. Stuart Wilson, who I've always known best as the bad guy in Lethal Weapon 3, is a very serviceable conduit as the audience, conflicted in his emotions. And Ben Kingsley, between how his character is written and his ability to deliver dialogue with such a straight and leading manner, is absolutely chilling by the end of the film. It's movies like this which have impressed upon me the power of truly great acting, and in the hands of a director like Roman Polanski, he's always been able to hone in on building tension until an ultimate horrifying climax. I also learned that this movie was filmed in order of how the story goes, and I know that this happens occasionally, but for this one in particular, it seems like there's no other way. All of these actors must have been so spent after the production wrapped. The decision to have Austrian composer Franz Schubert's Death in the Maiden as the central musical element was also a smart move. It brings us further into the world and reminds us of the horrors that Paulina endured each time it was played during her weeks of captivity. I don't know what works best in Death in the Maiden, the performances or the tension building, but no revenge will satisfy Paulina, and who knows how you'll feel at the film's climax, but to call this story simply powerful is an understatement. In a movie which bases itself in real-world conditions, how could anyone ever have closure in any satisfying fashion? So check this movie out while you can. It is streaming for free on Tubi and Crackle right now. It's not for the kiddies. It's a very adult drama, and it doesn't get more guttural than this atmospheric, magnificent, and grossly underseen film.
Yeah, I really have to see this. I'm going to check it out before it leaves Tubi.
It's worth it. It's not an uplifting movie.
Yeah. What a title, too.
It leaves a lot of mystery in the title.
Offers nothing.
Yes. Unless you're a fan of classical music.
Yeah.
All right, Justin, tell us about Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Though I hadn't seen First Blood Part 2, I don't think really since I was a kid. Once I started watching it, I was like, you know what? I've seen First Blood, but I haven't seen Part 2 in forever. If you haven't seen First Blood in a while, it's a really great movie, but it's more based in realistic drama. And James Cameron did the first draft of First Blood Part 2. And I think he does what he does best. There's government corruption. He made it less about the drama and more about the action and more about this character being more heroic, and also had a secondary character be a strong female lead. But the setup picks up 3 years after First Blood. He's been in a work prison for about 3 years, busting up rocks. And his commanding officer, who is the person who helped get him out of trouble in the first movie, comes and says, hey, you know, there's a secret mission. They'll reinstate you. Do you want to be in this prison any longer? And so he said, you know, why don't you do this mission for us, and hopefully they'll pardon you and won't have to go back to prison. And so they set up this mission pretty quickly. His assignment is to go into Vietnam, sort of going back into enemy lines and checking to see if there's any POWs left. And like these POW camps, he's kind of shocked to find out, like, oh, there's still people there. And he said, go in. We just want you to take photos. We don't want you to do anything. So as soon as they set it up, Sylvester Stallone gears up. And now we see the first time of Stallone, this version of Stallone. There's all these close-ups of his physique. This is mid-'80s Stallone, where he's now competing with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But he gets there, immediately things go south. The government's not expecting him to find any POWs. And when he does, he's like, I found him. You need to come in and help. And they're like, oh man, we don't want all this attention on us that we left soldiers there. So they basically aren't going to help him. They're not going, they canceled their mission on picking him up. They were supposed to pick him up in 2 or 3 days. So this really pisses him off. His commanding officer didn't know about it. So he's like the Rambo hype man. The Colonel Trotman character played by Richard Crenna, he reminds me a lot of Donald Pleasant's Dr. Loomis. He's just, he thinks of Rambo as larger than life. He's a killing machine. He's trained for this. You have no idea how much power he has. And so he's always kind of hyping him up. And it's true to life. Rambo, essentially, the next hour of the movie is him going in, getting these POWs and coming back for revenge. And this movie clocks in about 90 minutes, and there's really very little time wasted. There's some really great action set pieces, and it's a very simple story, but I think Sylvester Stallone does what he does best in this movie. And this was a wild year for Stallone. This movie was an international success. It like broke all these records as far as like international movies, and sort of was the starting ground of big, huge action movies doing better overseas than they do in America. But in 1985, he puts out First Blood Part 2 and Rocky IV, both of which were huge international movies, made like $300 million each at the box office, and kind of cemented himself in one of the top tier action movie stars. The movie was directed by George P. Cosmatos, who worked again with Stallone in another one of my picks of the week, Cobra. He also did, prior to First Blood Part 2, he did a lower budget movie that's really cool with Peter Weller called Of Unknown Origin. It's a creature in a house type movie, very worth your while. And then he also directed the classic Western Tombstone. So Rambo First Blood Part 2, if you haven't seen it in a while, I'd just start from the beginning, just throw on First Blood, go right into First Blood Part 2. I wanted to see Rambo 3 before we did this episode because I wanted to, have done the trilogy. I didn't get to it yet. I suspect that that's the worst of them all. I did see the last 2 Rambo movies. There's 5 of these movies, if you can believe it. I haven't seen Rambo 3 in forever, so I can't speak on that one. But at least 4 of the 5, I can tell you, are worth your time.
All of the Sylvester Stallone movies I watched as a kid and have not revisited, but definitely part of my childhood, and like looking up stills from this and the actors, I'm like, oh yeah, totally, I remember this happens in that scene, but I can't tell you like the story by itself. So I'm very happy to have this reminder.
Those are our picks of the week: Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Death and the Maiden. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even chill.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shut?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
Because we've been discussing one of the best sequels of all time, I thought it was a good idea to revisit another sequel with Sigourney and Billy. Duh, Ghostbusters 2. Whether you dig this sequel or not, what will always keep me coming back to this one isn't really the legacy of Ghostbusters, but more the relationship between and evolution of the characters I grew to love from the original. Sigourney's Dana Barrett fought off Billy's Peter Venkman right up until the very end of the movie, and in the sequel, we find them as estranged former partners, Dana now with a baby, and quick fun fact, that was originally written as Venkman's kid but was ultimately decided against. But now Venkman is forcing his way back into her life, crudely and passively, with that kind of clunky charm attempting to woo her back. So let's take you back to this sequel and the playful harassing that Sigourney endured at the hands of Billy during the one and only date we ever witnessed between Dana Barrett and Peter Venkman. You diehards, you know the scene. Peter, if I had this kind of support on a 24-hour-day basis, I could have myself whipped into shape by the end of this century. Dana, well, why don't you give me a jingle in the year 2000? Peter, why don't I give you a jingle right now? First of all, on a purely personal level, Peter's attempt at flirting is where I learned all my awkward, ineffective moves in the world of flirtation. Secondly, and more importantly, let's go behind the scenes of this one. You got to crank it up a little, director Ivan Reitman says to Bill. You're still a quart low. This is the last week of a 13-week shoot, and there's still so much to get done. The crew, Ivan, Sigourney, and Billy, have been at this scene for over 8 hours, and the 2 stars are sweating in the brightly lit restaurant scene. The stage is set, and this is going to be the moment. Then out of nowhere, Billy stands up, waving his dinner napkin in the air. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this Academy Award nominee Sigourney Weaver's last shot of the movie? Of course, by this point, Sigourney has been nominated for Best Actress, like we said, for Aliens in '87, and this particular year, Best Actress for Gorillas in the Mist, and the same year, 1989, Best Supporting Actress in Working Girl. And all three of these movies we've now discussed on this podcast. Leave it to Bill to get a chuckle from the crew and everyone who still just wants to get the scene over with, yet he's still continuing to stall. Apparently, throughout the film's production, during technical delays and timeouts, Bill had been concerned with reminding the crew to not keep the Oscar nominee waiting. Ivan Reitman's got to placate to his star. "You're right, Bill. It's her last close-up." Continuing to razz Sigourney, Bill says, "I say if she blows this scene, maybe she doesn't deserve the awards." The crew boos back at him. Okay, he corrects himself. "She thrives on the pressure," he says. Then he leans over to Sigourney, who's just putting up with this playful harassment, and whispers to her, "You know, you're not such a big deal when you're working with actors as tall as you are." Sigourney can't help but laugh at that one, especially when Bill follows it up with, "That's right, you can't work with Mel Gibson forever." Gibson, who starred with Sigourney in my pick of the week back in episode 87, The Year of Living Dangerously, clocks in at 5'10" and does kind of shrink when standing next to his 6-foot co-star. And admittedly, Sigourney does look more evenly matched with the 6'2" Billy. Another quick fun fact, Sigourney's height always played against her in her early acting days, so this joke that Billy's making is considerably funnier because she's become such a huge success by this point. Ivan eventually gets everybody to settle down, including Billy, and he and Sigourney finish the scene out. The crew cheers, and Sigourney stands, spins, takes a bow to wrap her time on Ghostbusters 2. And as the cheering dies down, Bill just can't help himself for one more round of teasing his beloved co-star. He says loudly while staring at Weaver's chest, "Is it just me, or can everyone see straight through Sigourney's dress?" This desire to have Dana Barrett and Peter Venkman back together is something that has even persisted into the latest Ghostbusters installment, Afterlife, in an in-credits punch-in which kind of only appeals to us diehards. We know there's love here between these two characters, and really, between these two actors forevermore. If you haven't heard a previous Murray moment concerning Billy and Sigourney, please check out episode 18, The Ice Storm, which was about a play the two did together in 2002 called The Guys. I was a little tired when we recorded that episode, but the story is still a really good one, despite me sounding a little more off than usual. So many of these Murray moments in the early days, I wish I could go back and retell some of them.
I'm glad you're able to get a Ghostbusters 2 Murray moment in here. It's been a while since I've heard any Ghostbusters talk from you.
Mm-hmm. I was determined, bound and determined, and then I found this story, and yeah, great.
Well, thank you for that Murray moment.
Of course.
Well, we should close things out here pretty soon, but before we do say goodbye, let's talk about those Alien sequels, just very briefly. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about them a little bit when we did the Alien episode. But I rewatched both the Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection before we did this episode, and I had never seen Alien 3, the re-edited version.
Yeah.
Where the studio they asked David Fincher, I think, to recut it because I guess that was a big disaster. Like they recut the whole movie, and he like disowns it, and he even was just like, F off, I'm not gonna go back to this movie. I just don't ever want it to be a part of my life again. So I guess they found his editing notes. I don't know how, but maybe they're just making that up. But apparently they recut the movie in the way that he originally wanted it. I guess now that he's became a big, respected, influential director, they were like, hey, we should market this and we'll release this new version. But I think it came out in 2003, but I did watch that. And I will say, I was never a hater of Alien 3. I always was fine with it. I know it's not the greatest movie in the franchise, but I didn't mind it. And I do think that this new re-edit that they did, and it's not new anymore, but I do think that this re-edit that they did in 2003 is a better version of it. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's worth checking out. It's you can find it on Vudu, you can rent it, or it's on the Alien 3 Blu-ray.
I'm 100% with you. I love the recut version. I mean, the third one, it's much darker, completely different vibe, but the recut version adds so much more in there that I find very interesting, and it's not a waste of time. I'm not going to say what my one chief complaint is. It's something that's left out that was in the theatrical cut, like right at the very end. It's kind of a bummer, but otherwise, 99% on board with Alien 3. In fact, I think it makes it a better movie if you watch this version.
Yeah, I do too.
Now, Alien Resurrection, watching that one made me do a little bit of ranking. And like story-wise, we have to care about the characters and what they're going through. And Aliens, if you don't care about all of the Marines, obviously Ripley and Newt, then you don't care about the movie, but it is very much an ensemble piece. The first one is so much more distinctive. It's lonely and isolating and very limited amount of characters. You can't help but care about them. 4 is the one where I don't really care about a lot of the main characters. I do care about Winona Ryder, who plays yet again a reimagining of a synthetic robot character. But if I'm caring more about the rapists and murderers in the prison world of Alien 3 than I am Alien Resurrection, yeah, I'm gonna rank from. It goes in order actually of how I care about everyone in the franchise 1, 2, 3, 4.
I didn't like Alien Resurrection when it came out, but I was determined to rewatch it before we did this episode, and man, it was tough for me to get through that thing. To me, it goes against everything that the first 3 movies built up. They go totally kind of goofy with the Sigourney Weaver character. Tonally, it's strange. It goes from like weird humor to like super high drama. And the last 45 minutes of the movie feels like I'm watching an episode of like a Joss Whedon sci-fi comedy, spaceship movie.
You kind of are.
Spaceship TV show.
Yeah.
Again, I just think it doesn't connect the other movies in a way of like if you're going to have Sigourney Weaver in it, which I'm kind of surprised that she did the movie. Maybe it was just because they offered her like gobs of money.
Probably.
Because it just doesn't feel like an Alien movie. None of the characters feel like an Alien movie. The humor doesn't feel like an Alien movie. And the actual creatures, you're showing the creature too much that it becomes less scary. And the swimming alien has got to be like the worst iteration of the alien in the franchise. And as much as I've loved Winona Ryder, and man, we love her on this podcast, I also think she's like the worst version of a synthetic. It's like she doesn't act like a synthetic. When we find out she's a synthetic, it's the worst part of the movie for me, because we have the guy go, "Oh no, bro, I heard about these," and he like starts like saying all this exposition, which is supposed to explain why she's new. And it just, the whole thing to me was kind of a train wreck. And visually, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, Jean-Pierre Jeunet's vision of this movie and his general aesthetic style, I like. That's not something that I have an issue with, but I agree with you that it doesn't fit within the alien world. The character of Ripley, her evolution of being a clone, where else are you going to go by the 4th movie? Okay, I'll accept clone. Ripley, I don't have a problem with. I don't have a problem with the way the movie looks. The times that it goes super dark and like where she meets other versions of her clone, alien hybrid clone, I will admit I might get teary-eyed in 2 specific scenes. Otherwise, I'm just watching something that's outside of the franchise. But I admire the attempt to make it different. I'm still going to watch it. I'm still going to include it in the quadrilogy of this. But I think anything after Aliens feels like it just kind of like lost a little bit of magic. And honestly, when Aliens 3 starts and Hicks is dead and Newt's dead, it's almost like you just feel like you just got socked in the face, because you spent all of Aliens going through this, and Ripley escaped with this, like kind of family situation. And then they're dead right at the beginning of 3. It's a bummer to start out with.
Yeah. And Ridley Scott's went back to the alien well a few times with Prometheus, and then he did that Alien Covenant movie, which was really just kind of rehashed the first Alien. I don't know. I didn't even want to rewatch it again for this, because that's how little I cared about it the first time. And I did see that Hulu is doing an Alien television series. I'm going to keep my expectations low for that. I just don't know how much further you can go with this, without just kind of, starting from scratch, other than if you're just throwing the Alien name on it in hopes that you'll get viewership, which, marketing wise is not a bad idea at all.
Justin, I know that we're wrapping this up, but I got one more thing. Can I just say this one quick thing?
I say go for it. Well, this is going to be a record-long episode for us.
Okay, so it just sprung to mind. You said Joss Whedon, he wrote Resurrection. I mean, it was around the time when I was really getting into Buffy, and, there are certain catchphrases in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the show. And there's a phrase that the character Faith says whenever, she's talking, somebody's like, hey, you got that alligator in a headlock over there? You doing okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm 5x5. It's such a well-known phrase if you like the show. I have no idea how many years ago it was that I figured it out, but eventually doing a Google search, other people have noticed this too, that in Aliens, there's a part where Corporal Farrow, who's one of the pilots, is asked how I think her landing is coming in, and she says something like, we're in the pipe, 5x5. And it's a line that stands out too in the movie. I have to believe, and I've never seen an interview or Joss Whedon, say that he ripped off that line from Aliens, but I can't help but think he had to. If you know the answer to this, any gentle viewer out there, you know the answer, if you thought this too, drop us a line. But it's one of those moments when, you're a super fan of something and you see a connection, you're like, I don't see any other explanation.
If you do have an answer for that, you can contact us at don'tpushpausePodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we also have a YouTube channel that has all of our old episodes, and you can also find those archived on our website at don'tpushpausePodcast.com. Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reaper.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.